Good evening. Hi, everybody. I'm a senior editor at The Atlantic magazine, where I write about economics and the media mostly, and we're here to talk about the future of work and the future of dignity in the workplace. But I'm also the author of a new book, Hitmakers, and I'm contractually obligated to talk about it. My publisher has robotic spies everywhere speak of the future of work. I wanted to begin this discussion. You know, my book sort of looks at the science of sort of the academics who have studied why people like what they like, why some articles go viral, why we like the stories and the music and the movies that we like, and sort of uses that academic research and kind of shuttle runs it over to the practitioners in these industries in entertainment, in the movie industry and music and television, to ask them, how do you make stuff that people love? So in many ways, it's a very contemporary look at pop culture that points toward the near future of leisure and entertainment. But I want to begin tonight's discussion with a very old story in pop culture. It's the story of Impressionism, and it actually bears quite directly on the conversation that we're going to have tonight. In the 1860s, 1870s, Impressionism was famously despised by the academia in France. They thought that it was pathetic that these people couldn't paint anything that looked realistic, that they were just terrible painters who put ink blots onto canvas. And there was one painter who was a part of this group, les Impressionnistes, they called themselves, or les Intransigistes, and his name was Gustave Caillebotte. Very few people know Gustave Caillebotte's name now, but he was one of the more famous painters at this time in the Impressionist movement. And he collected all of his best friends' work. And he died in the early 1890s of a stroke, and he bequeaths his entire collection to the French state. And the French state says, no, this would be an absolute disgrace for us to hang these paintings in a French museum. But he has an executor who haggles, and finally these paintings are hung in an Impressionist wing at the Musée de Luxembourg. The first time ever that Impressionist art was hung in a French state museum. There were 7 painters who just randomly Gustave Caillebotte collected and just randomly happened to have been hung in this Impressionist wing. Their names were Manet, Monet, Cézanne, Degas, Renoir, Pissarro, and Sisley. They remain today these 7 core Impressionist painters. In the 1950s, they were the core 7 Impressionist painters. In the 1980s, still today, the core 7 Impressionist painters. So what does this say about psychology? Well, a psychologist named James Cutting was at the Musée d'Orsay, where a lot of these paintings are now, and he's looking at some of the paintings that were in the Caillebotte collection and comparing them to paintings that weren't in the Caillebotte collection and thinking to himself, is it possible that the reason that everybody likes these paintings is just some historical quirk, some accident of history that happened to publicly consecrate all of this work as classic, thereby separating it from just as good stuff that is now not classic? And so he did this cheeky thing in his next psychology class. He bombarded students with obscure artwork from the late 19th century that was not in the Impressionist canon. For every 4 times he would show a non-famous piece of artwork, he would only show a famous Impressionist work once. So what he was trying to do essentially was to create a parallel universe of art history where people happened to be repeatedly exposed to non-famous paintings. And at the end of the second course, he asks his students to choose their favorite paintings of the entire Impressionist era. And lo and behold, it turns out that students prefer the non-famous paintings that they've seen over and over and over in his class. So in a few weeks, he has essentially undone the entire Impressionist canon. What does this say about pop culture markets, about the human mind, about why we like what we like, the science of popularity? One of the oldest and sturdiest ideas in psychology is this idea called the mere exposure effect. And the mere exposure effect is the concept that the more times you are exposed to a stimulus, to a piece of music, to a picture, to an idea, the more you are likely to like it. That familiarity breeds liking, particularly when the source of that familiarity is a little bit sneaky. This is true of music. We tend to like genres of music that we hear over and over again. It's true of individual songs. We tend to like a song more and more and more and more as we listen to it, and then less and less and less once we've sort of heard it 100 times in 2 days. It's even true, most interestingly, of human faces. The human face is slightly asymmetrical. And studies show that we prefer the vision, the version of the human face that we see in the mirror, the opposite of our actual face. Why would this make sense? Are we objectively more beautiful when we look at ourselves in the mirror? No, that's just the version of our face that we're most likely, that we're most familiar with, that we're most likely to see. It's possible, I think, that the vast majority of biases that we consider political or cultural in nature, whether it's misogyny or racism or anti-Semitism or anti-Christianity, I think are fundamentally often biases of familiarity. We have an incredibly strong preference toward those ideas and those cultural norms with which we are familiar. For example, there are some studies that suggest that children that grow up in multicultural neighborhoods are much less likely to grow up with racist attitudes. So some of you must be thinking, I think probably including the baby in the back, what could this possibly have to do with the future of work? Well, technology is the very definition of the unfamiliar. The definition of technology is something new. The definition of technology is something that is surprising. It is inherently unfamiliar. In fact, this is something that technologists deal with all of the time. Because they're inherently designing things that are new, their challenge is to make those new products sneakily familiar in order to be appealing. I don't know how many of you saw the movie Steve Jobs, but there's that line where Michael Fassbender is looking at one of the first Mac computers, and he says, it has to say hello. It has to look like a face. To sell something surprising, he had to make it familiar. Think about one of the most novel new technologies, Alexa, AI, that you call out to and it plays music or tells you a recipe for coq au vin. What does Alexa sound like when you talk to it? Does it sound like a robot? Does it sound like something that is unfamiliar and strange? No. It has a lilting female voice. It sounds, in a rather gendered way, you might say, like a classic assistant. To sell something surprising, they had to make it familiar. The familiar social contract in the United States has been one for many years where education leads to a middle-class income, where income grows dependently, and where work is the most dependable source of meaning in our lives outside, perhaps, of our families. But I think we are living through a period where all of these assumptions are being challenged, are being changed. The familiar storyline is upending itself. And so the question that we're going to talk about today is what happens when work, or the expectation to work, goes away? Obviously, work has changed a lot in the last 150 years. We used to be a nation of agrarian farmers, and then we became a nation of factory workers, and now we're becoming a nation of service sector workers. And through each of these changes, we tend to create more jobs, more jobs, more jobs. But at the same time, the transition between these periods is always scary, and it is always surprising. It is fundamentally sort of shocking to us to have to adapt to new ways to orient ourselves around how we live and what we do for work. One rather surprising implication of this from history is what has happened to first names. For the longest period of time, first names were not a fashion like they are today, where so many first names follow a hype cycle, so that if you meet someone named Ethel or Edna, you are likely to sort of guess at how old that person might be, whereas Madison, for example, is a very popular name for baby girls, which has just come out of nowhere. Today, first names have a hype cycle, but that wasn't always the case. For the vast majority of human history, first names were a tradition. They were simply passed down one generation to the next. Between the 1550s and the 1800s, half of all the men in England were named William, Thomas, or John, and half of all the women were named Elizabeth, Anne, or Mary. This simply did not change. It was your job to be named Elizabeth, Mary, Thomas, or John. And this didn't seem very strange because we were an agrarian economy. And in an agrarian economy, you live on a small farm with your family. So it makes absolute sense that identity is constructed by familial lineage, that your father was Thomas and he was a farmer, and you are named Thomas because you're a farmer, and you'll name your son Thomas because he's a farmer. The first name is your identity, and your identity is your family. But what happens when 100,000 Thomases move into the London metropolitan area in the late 19th century and realize that there's lots of people who share the first name who are nothing like you? They are nothing like your father. They are nothing like the identity that you thought you had. And so by necessity, first names went from being a tradition to a fashion. Identity is antagonistic. It is how we represent ourselves in opposition to those that are around us. And so in an incredibly surprising way that might be totally unpredictable, an economic change, a change in the kind of work that people did that changed England and the United States and Canada from an agrarian society where people lived on family farms to an urban society where people had to pack in so that they could easily commute to the urban factory, changed human identity so much that it changed the way we think about our first names, the thing that is closest to the definition of who we are. We're going to be talking a little bit in the next 40 minutes or so about meaning and about where meaning comes from in work. This is a really thorny question and a really big and important question because for so many people, work is the thing that not only occupies their day, but gives them meaning in life and gives them a kind of calling, a kind of transcendent idea that they are doing something that is larger than the individual. In the book, I talk to aesthetic psychologists about where meaning comes from in cultural markets. Why does one art piece give us meaning but another doesn't? Why does one story give meaning but another does not? And there's another study that was done with art history, that was done with Cubism, actually, where a psychologist showed a bunch of participants Cubist paintings and asked them to rate their appeal. And a lot of people suggested that they didn't understand what was going on in the Cubist paintings. They didn't like them very much. And then what they would do is they would show them similar paintings, but they would give them some sort of clue as to what the Cubist painting was about. So if the painting, for example, sort of looked like a swordfish, then they would give the hint Pisces, or they might give them the clue Picasso loved the Mediterranean. And in this second round of studies, people's liking of the painting suddenly soared. It was like they were confronting a stranger who seemed to reach out with a hand and offer friendship suddenly. They were confronting something that was confusing and anxious, and then they found meaning in it. And this moment between the anxiety of confronting something new and the rush of suddenly understanding it is called the aesthetic aha. The aesthetic aha. It is the difference, it is that moment where meaning clicks into focus from confusion into understanding. So I think what many of us are looking for in the hour-to-hour of our jobs is a series of these aesthetic ahas. We want achievable challenges from work. We want work that pushes us to stretch our cognitive bounds, but nonetheless allows us to have aesthetic ahas. And one of the questions that we're going to be going over in the next 40 minutes or so is whether the sort of work is whether the work of the future can provide perhaps even more aha moments, even more meaning than the jobs of today offer. Of course, we also hope that we offer aesthetic ahas in the mere presentation of information as well. And that's all I have. If I'd like to ask my fellow panelists to come join me on the stage, and we'll jump right into this.
Let's sit first. Well done.
First up, let's just go down and introduce ourselves, name and institution.
Michael Smith, Carnegie Mellon University.
Perfect.
I'm Bruce Weinberg, and I'm in the Department of Economics here at Ohio State.
I'm Joe Kabaski. I'm a development economist from the University of Notre Dame.
So, Joe, I want to start with you. You've written a lot about how the economy has moved through, I guess you could call it these sort of three stages. Agrarian farming economy, industrial economy, where 40% of us about worked in manufacturing, to today where we're clearly moving into a services and innovation economy. Have each of these stages included their own sort of roiling over that which has been lost in this sort of panic of nostalgia that says we can't keep going down this path, we have to reclaim that the familiar economy?
Yeah, I think that's right. You mentioned that people are always sort of feeling that whatever they grew up with is the way the world was. That we see that today with the sort of the decline of manufacturing and the growth of the service economy, and a lot of people lament the decline of manufacturing. I mean, the decline of agriculture, this is a way of living for people that lasted thousands of years. Really, the decline of manufacturing is, in the United States, for example, is a few generations lasting from the late 19th century to the late 20th century. But it does get people, upset. And I think there's kind of two things. One I would say is that the decline of manufacturing isn't entirely a bad thing. If you go, I was just in a sweatshop in India where you could hardly breathe because of the exhaust and the chemicals that are being used in a textile mill. The fact that we have machines that are able to do that is a benefit to society on one level. There was the fact that I'm from Notre Dame, that Rudy didn't have to work in the foundry. He got to go to Notre Dame. It was a benefit. We don't need tons of people working in the steel mills, which are not particularly comfortable places. But I think that these changing epochs come with some major challenges. One is that the decline of manufacturing has hurt the working class, and it's kind of the skills that are needed for the service industry, and especially the services that are growing tend to be the much more skill-intensive industries. You need greater skills, and so it pays some people pays off very well for those people that are more educated, perhaps more talented. But the wealthier are getting wealthier, and then the working class is suffering. So that's a big issue.
One issue that so fascinates me is just the love we have, the extremely emotional relationship that we have with industrial jobs, even those that aren't representative of the economy. So 2 points. First, we talk about the decline of manufacturing, but total industrial production in the US keeps rising. So the decline of manufacturing is an employment phenomenon, right? But you have politicians on both after elections, but certainly during elections, talk a lot about steel workers and factory workers as sort of the marrow of the U.S. economy, and then you pull back and you think, well, there's 64,000 steel workers in America. We're going to add 800,000 home health care aides in the next decade. What do you think it is about this industry, about this particular kind of work, that not only provides meaning to the individual workers, but also provides a kind of metaphorical glow for non-manufacturing workers who nonetheless seem to see this industry as the perfect representation of the American worker?
So I think part of it is it's an odd thing. Again, this is an unusual thing. If you just imagine people going from working steel to doing home health, and we have a negative view on that, and thinking of human dignity, of course the steel, or even the agriculture, right? The food, maybe it's more basic, but it's the industries that are growing are education, health. These are sort of things where you serve, your services, you're serving other human beings. That's a particularly human thing that's catering to sort of our higher level. They're more interpersonal. So it's odd that so maybe it is a nostalgia in some level, but I think the second thing is that I think the manufacturing era in the United States, which actually manufacturing never was the majority of the economy in any way. But the manufacturing area is associated with a person, a working person who was hardworking, didn't have to be overly educated, being able to provide for their family in a way that society viewed as being positive. And I think that's a lot of where the meaning from work comes, and increasingly so in the future. Economists are not very good at predictions, but so
Particularly about the future.
particularly about the future. We don't even do very well in the past, and sometimes the present. There's two things that work does. One is in Catholic social thought, there's the idea that work, the objective value of work. That's the value of what you do. If you're a farmer, you produce food, and food benefits society. It earns you a living. And that's obviously a primary reason that you do work, but it's not the only reason you do work. The second part is that it actually builds you up as a person. So you have skills that you put to service for the community, you maybe put them to service of God, that builds you up as a person. And that second part is, on some level, we do produce more manufacturing goods than we did. We produce more food than we did. We produce more services. You might think that we could just redistribute these very easily, and everybody would be fine. But it's not fine if you're just being a pet, if you're being treated by you receiving food every day, but you can't actually fulfill your life and feel that you are part of something bigger. So I think that's a problem with especially the less educated classes, that you don't see the same fulfillment in working at McDonald's than maybe you did working for GM or something.
This may be the perfect question for you, Bruce, which is that the economy as a whole is so much richer than it was 20 years ago. But the majority of individuals don't seem to feel richer. And I wonder to what extent that is either a psychological deficit, whether it's because their expectations were here and we only grew to here, or whether it's because there is a serious redistribution problem where there is more absolute wealth, but it isn't being equally shared. I say either or, but there's also the possibility of interlacing Venn diagrams, of course.
Right. No, that's a great question, Derek. I think that is a large part of what we see. The second, the first is a little harder for me to respond to as an economist, to what extent it's about expectations and maybe not quite reaching aspirations and expectations. But I think what we have seen is we have seen growth. We've seen growth that's not as fast as it had been historically. But what we've really seen is tremendous spreading out of income, spreading out of the income distribution. And the language here is a little sloppy, but you can think of it as the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Wealth is sort of about assets. This is more about earning, so it's a little bit sloppy to use that language. More recently, we've seen a little bit more of the rich getting richer, if you will, and the poor not getting poorer. And then sort of the middle kind of hollowing out of the distribution. But in either case, we've seen an increase, a very substantial increase in inequality. And so there have been gains, but those gains have frequently gone to the highest income, highest earning people. And I think part of it, going back to Joe, what you were saying, is that who part of it is just about inequality, but part of it is also about families and households. So sort of, manufacturing was, especially durable manufacturing, was very intensive employer of men. And a lot of the service industries are much more employing women much more heavily. And so sort of you also have a reshaping of the expectations of who's going to be working. And that's coincided with arguably one of the largest shifts, arguably the largest shift in in the labor markets over the past, and the nature of work over the past 50 years, which is the increasing employment of women. who historically didn't work after they got married and had children, and now that's not the case anymore. I mean, women are disproportionately working throughout their lives.
And one of the ironies of technological change is that, in a way, listening to both of you, I thought, there is a bit of a genderized notion that manufacturing jobs are good and service sector jobs are weaker, because manufacturing jobs are often definitionally brawny. It is the making of hard stuff, and perhaps sometimes as a culture we overlook the value of service work, which is a little bit less physical, a little bit less dramatizable, and therefore maybe we associate less valor with it. But in looking at what happens to sort of at predictions of technological change over the next few decades, there are theories that say it's a lot of the masculine work that's going to be sort of the first to be cleaved away, that it's this sort of routine-based work that machines and algorithms are best at replacing, which leaves the service sector jobs where women are now sort of majority employed within those industries. How do you think that's going to change the economy and change the way we think about valuable work?
I think it's a great question, and that what we have seen is as you say, the automation of things that are routine and that computers can do, or that robots can do, and in some cases, as you say, Joe, that's really a fantastic thing. But then, that leaves these portions of jobs that are less automatable. The sort of part of that's the intelligence and the insight and the creativity part of jobs, and I think that's came up in what you're talking about is going to come up with Michael, but part of it is sort of the caring part, and part of it in the interpersonal interactions part, and then part of it is the sort of the physical part that's not taking out the trash. It's just hard. That's a hard thing to program a computer to do. The trash can's in a different place. Put it a little bit to the left today, and the robot reaches doesn't quite get it right. So that's I think that's how I think that's how the next set of technologies are going to probably start. They've kind of come into the middle with the things that are routine, and I think they're going to increasingly kind of go out and get the higher end and the lower end. I think the other thing is, it is a little bit of a, I think it's a little bit of a fallacy that I think we are not the first people to suffer from, that if you're not making something tangible,
for sure,
that you're not making something. And I don't know how, as an economist, you sit on an airplane and they're saying, what do you do? Oh, I'm an economist. And they go, how the heck, my granddaughter works in Silicon Valley, and she just programs these things, and what's she making? And how are we going to
That was Ethel that I was talking about, actually.
Food on our tables. How do I, get my shirt? It's just something that it's just very hard for people to wrap their heads around, that's valuable. But, we all carry around our phones and we can't put them down. I do think this is sort of like a fallacy. I think it goes, I think the Russians, the old Soviet Union suffer. It's hard for people to wrap their heads around.
Tangibility. Actually, this is a famous Adam Smith Adam Smith fell into the fallacy. We talked about productive work and unproductive work, and unproductive work was basically services. Mm-hmm. But so there's something about the tangibility. There's also something of.
And what did Adam Smith make again?
It was unproductive. Okay.
He was a content creator.
But there's something of nostalgia too. I just think that there's, I think when agrarian society first emerged on the earth, there were probably people that lamented the decline of hunter-gatherers because that's
There's still people, by the way, who think that we should go back, that the agricultural revolution was terrible for us, right, in terms of diet. So Yeah, they're sort of they're meta nostalgists. They're nostalgic for the sort of 50,000 BC. Michael, thinking of the productive work that you do about the unproductive work that other people do.
Bless you.
Thank you. You know, one interesting thing. So it was it's more of X paradox that that robots seem very, very good at doing really, really hard things like beating Russians in chess, and really bad at doing easy things like walking downstairs and picking up babies. One thing that they don't seem very good at is making music or writing stories. Right now we live, I think, in a golden age of digital creation, in large part thanks to these enormous platforms that have come online that allow individual makers to make a joke, a story, a meme that can just travel far and wide outside of their neighborhood. You've done a lot of work on the relationship between platforms and content, and those words are thrown around a lot. So I want you first to define what is content versus what is a platform, and what are we seeing right now with the rise of platforms that is clearly different from the entertainment landscape of a generation ago?
Yeah, so again, great question. A lot of my work is really about how technology is changing this one particular industry of entertainment. And you know, if you think about content, if you say that to a content creator, it would be a show or a song or an album or a book. And then if you think about a platform, that's really a distribution platform, historically FM or television broadcast. Today, much more of Amazon and Netflix and Google. And some of the things we're seeing in both our research and the book. I have a contract too.
Yes,
so,
you do.
We have a book called Streaming, Sharing, Stealing, Big Data and the Future of Entertainment. But one of the things we see in that book is that actually these platforms where it's no longer a broadcast channel, it's actually a personalized channel just for you based on your preferences, allow content creators to profitably tell stories that wouldn't have been profitable in the old model of we have 4 broadcast channels and your story has to fit in the 8:30 time slot on Thursday. Right. And that's, you know, I think that's a powerful, wonderful thing for storytelling. One of the things that resonated with me about both your book and what you set up at the beginning is, I don't know, if a lot of our affinity or response to someone else's message is based on familiarity, what happens when my channel is showing me stuff that is completely different than what your channel is showing? And again, in the context of social discourse, does that leave us with a real gap in an ability to communicate?
Right. Well, I think that's all the time in terms of the concept of the MSM, the mainstream media, right? Like on the one hand, it makes a lot of sense to talk about a clear mainstream media when there are 3 television channels and a handful of FM radio stations that have the power to broadcast to tens of millions of people, a single story. They are setting the message. It's America's uncle, Walter Cronkite. And right now, you know, the largest media organizations cannot possibly claim any similar monopoly over their audience. Even the many people who are subscribing to, you know, the New York Times, maybe it's 1 million, 2 million, are, you know, getting their news from 1,000 other places. And it very easily allows us to bifurcate into our own little filter bubbles, where, for example, there is a world of Breitbart readers who I might never meet, and then, you know, a world of sort of Vox readers who the Breitbart people will never meet. And it allows.
Or if they do, bad things are going to happen.
Terrible things are going to happen. Right? Understanding might happen. My God. And that is fascinating to me too. But there's a bright side to this too, which is that. As the gatekeepers go away, individual creators whose message might not have been appealing to, say, you know, a white guy in a suit in the 1950s in Los Angeles can nonetheless break through, right? So you can have niche at scale in this fascinating way that allows, you know, surprising and formerly marginalized voices to shine forth in these platforms too, right?
Yeah, and in fact, again, a lot in the broadcast channel, you had to make the decision about what gets made up front. You know, I had a bunch of scripts, and I got to choose one, and the rest of you go home. now on a lot of these platforms, we can let everything go, and we can see what might surprise us in terms of what becomes a hit. And then the other aspect of this is, my daughter watches a lot of people playing Minecraft videos, and silly Studio C videos. It's not obvious that watching other kids play Minecraft is going to be a thing, but apparently it is.
But it's very much a thing. Right. It's interesting because to connect it to your research, as the labor market and as the economy become more productive, it's allowed people to decrease their hours worked per year all over the world. A little bit less in the US, but certainly in Western Europe and Northern Europe, which means that a lot of that time we are filling with leisure. We're filling it with entertainment. And I wonder what either your research or perhaps even your intuition, although I know you're academics and you might not want to share sort of an empirical intuition, says about value that might come from entertainment that was formerly reserved for the workplace, if you see what I mean. That people who might work less and less and less might reorient their lives around their leisure time rather than their work. What do we know about whether or not that would be a positive or negative trend?
I'll speak, since it's intuition, I'll give you my intuition as a human being rather than an economist. I think it increases the importance of thinking about how we spend our leisure money and our leisure time. And, is it I think of this with my kids all the time. Is it a great thing that they're watching other kids play a video game on a computer? That's just a very, maybe this is my nostalgia, but it's an odd thing, right? To have this sort of like observing.
You're welcome to come talk to my daughter at any time.
Observing life rather than living life. But I think it's one of the things I have my students read in my class is it's an article from ESPN.com. It's about freemium games. And I didn't know what a freemium game is. Maybe everybody here knows. But you get the game for free, and then you have to pay some extra money to get extra features or something like that. And the first thing is the data science that goes into the business is just insane. So the business model is most people don't pay anything for the game. And they make all of their money on a group of people that are addicted to the game. And the data science has figured out how to get these addicted people to never put down the game and never stop spending their money. So the subject of the article is this person who plays Clash of Clans, who was apparently for a long time the global leader and a video game legend. In fact, he spent $600 a week playing this game. But it didn't cost him any money because he had somebody that was willing to fund him. Some wealthy person in Italy was willing to fund this guy's video game playing. But the game sort of takes over his life, and he's like, he can't sleep because he might get passed. He's showering with 5 iPads in Ziploc bags as quick as he can so he doesn't lose a game. And the game takes over. And the point is that in some ways, the game design was meant to take him over. And so I think this it brings up questions about how free we are in our consumer decisions, but it also brings up questions about whether the decisions we're making on an objective level are leading to our own flourishing and the flourishing of others.
You know what's funny, and sorry to interrupt, Bruce, if you're going to chime in. As you were describing the obsession of this World of Warcraft, or what was it?
Clash of Clans.
Clash of Clans, excuse me.
I don't know
Clash
the difference.
No, yeah. As you were describing the obsession of this Clash of Clans game player, I was thinking, oh my God, how pathetic. He's in the shower with all these iPads, and it's just like, what a waste of a life. And yet, if you took the game out of this equation and you simply had a man looking at screens, the life that you describe is exactly the life that is lived by 22-year-olds that intern at investment banks. They spend all of their time in front of screens. They bring their work into the shower with them. They lose sleep. They get enormous funding from an institution that is commercially interested in their succeeding at a certain task. But it's interesting because intuitively, I want to say that let's say it's an investment bank. Let's say it's a startup that's trying to save the world and buy the world malaria nets. I would say that the latter has great value, and the video game player has none. But in fact, a lot of their activities are almost equivalent. Yeah. And in many ways, I can imagine a world where you could have machines that take care of the really, really hard stuff, the electric grid and the driving the cars and working the factories and even ordering the robots around. And it allows us to be free, but in fact we end up recreating the same sort of busyness that we were ironically freed from. And that's sort of I don't know, it's like a Kurt Vonnegut sort of image or something. I don't know.
Well, it's also to me.
They're in the Matrix, yeah.
I think it's also a Genesis 1 image, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Where what we're talking about is in the Judeo-Christian story is God creates work before the fall. That work is a good thing, and God rests and asks us to rest before the fall. That rest is a good thing, and I think you can paint a story where technology is actually damaging our ability to do both in many senses. And I say this with a good deal of pain. Like we did meetings all day, and then the nice people who organized this said, "You guys have 90 minutes to rest before dinner." Right? What did I do? I went upstairs and I answered some email, and I got on the phone with somebody. You finished an article, I'm not sure. I'm losing touch with what rest really looks like because the work is always there.
We also all have jobs that are where the work itself is leaky. It's very easy to, if my job was to stamp a piece of iron over and over and over again, I can't take that home with me. But my job is to just think of stuff to put down on a piece of paper or online and hope that people like it, and that never goes away. And I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, oh my God, I need to put this online. And you guys have similar jobs where the work can never escape you. And it's becoming, I think, more a world where, on the one hand, leisure is more infiltrated by work. But somewhat ironically, work can also be more infiltrated by leisure. I can look at my phone right now and pull up some YouTube stuff. I won't because I respect the panel, but you understand.
Work-life balance has changed, that's for sure. I remember there was a lot of studies about how much time people have, the internet wastes, how much money employers lose because of people doing Facebook or these other things. But they never calculate the fact that you would never be checking your email before you go to sleep and spending, before I go to sleep, the last hour, I spend a little bit of time talking to my wife, but usually the last hour is getting back on emails. And so you're sort of never, it's hard to, I think, the Sabbath is an important thing for keeping a sense of balance in your life. We are not made for work, ultimately. That's not the only thing that we're made for. And you can not work on Sunday, but keeping that balance on the other 6 days, it's still a difficult thing in today's workplace.
Can I ask you all, what is the kind of work or the kind of at-office moments that you get the most joy and fulfillment from? Is it coming up with that great idea, that next book or paper? Is it the crystallization of some thesis? Is it sometimes just feeling like you're in flow, or maybe having a lovely conversation with some other person who sparks an idea? Is there a sort of moment that provides each of you with the most meaning?
Being an academic is, I don't know. Being a professor is such a joy anyway for me. Hanging out with students and seeing a student get something for the first time.
So watching meaning, right?
Yeah, is really exciting. I think coming up with a new way of making two things fit together. You and I were talking about the long tail versus blockbusters, right? And I in the book I got really excited about finally figuring out why long-tail products threaten blockbuster business models, and that's fun. There's, I don't know if any of you've seen the movie Chariots of Fire. There's this scene where the main character says, God made me fast, and when I run, I feel His pleasure, right? I find a certain pleasure in using the gifts God's given me to do something that I know makes him happy, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would echo that. I think you know, the ideas and working on the ideas and working with students on the ideas is the part of my job that I enjoy the most. Actually, when I came here straight out of graduate school as an assistant professor, we had a new faculty orientation, 200 of us, new faculty here at The Ohio State University. And they had a guy, a very senior faculty member, come up and he goes, teaching is so wonderful. I wonder every day why they even pay us to do it. I said, I just spent 5 years getting a PhD. Someone better be paying me something to do this. But now I'm kind of getting to the other end, and I'm like,
I actually remember when the dean said, why do you have to think of it as a teaching load? Why can't you think of it as a teaching opportunity?
That's right. That's exactly the key, because the part that's less fun is, do I have to know this for the exam? That's a learning opportunity, right? But I think it's interesting. So that's what I enjoy. I mean, I really do think it's a fantastic job. But one of the things going back to some of the themes that have come up, is that I think is interesting, is that usually I shouldn't say usually, as an economist, which may not, unless you sort of share twisted economics logic, it may not seem natural, but to an economist it seems natural that people who have the best jobs should make the least, and the people who have the worst jobs somehow need to be compensated for doing those difficult, unpleasant, dangerous, jobs. But that's actually not the way it works so out typically. Frequently, it's the people who make relatively good money and who are most skilled who actually have, either because of the nature of work or just because it's they can afford to essentially consume a better working environment, the best job. So we are in this odd place where I think all of us probably very much enjoy our jobs. Hopefully most of you do or will enjoy your jobs. But that's not universally the case. And in some cases, it's actually the people who don't make the most who have the jobs that are sort of the, working in the factory with the fumes and the physical labor and so forth. So it's, I think in some sense, I wouldn't say that we're unique, but I don't think that we're universal in this.
I love my job. I love almost everything about it, except for committee work and responding to referees. And I love everything about it. I would say there's a little bit of a question. Sometimes I like the balance between teaching and research, because there's always this maybe it's the tangibility aspect, but it's this idea of, well, do my ideas actually matter? Are they right? I don't know. I think they're right, but maybe they're not. But so if you're teaching, you're always producing something a little bit more tangible, and so that's a nice balance. But I think ultimately, like the reason that I think even mundane jobs, people can enjoy their work if they know why they're doing it, and they're doing it for the right reasons. They find purpose in it. I mentioned the people in the sweatshop. It's actually shocking to me that people would work in this kind of an environment, even in a very poor place like India. I would just go back to the farm or something. Of course, you make more money. But I think what really drives people, I mean, the people that are working there are losing, I think, years of their life. I could not stand it for 15 minutes being in the plant. But ultimately, what would drive them in that sort of a horrible situation is when you talk to them, they're doing it for their families. Right. They're doing it to give their children opportunities. And so I think if you're doing any job, if you're not doing it for the right reason, if you can't see the bigger picture in it, you're serving society. Martin Luther King had a famous quote when he defended the garbage workers in a strike, and he said, you know, any job that is of service to, I'm going to totally ruin Martin Luther King, but this is the gist of it. If you're doing something that's of service to humankind, your job has dignity. And it may not be very clear necessarily that a research economist, people on the plane never think our jobs have dignity, but it's very clear to a garbage worker. Like garbage has to be cleaned up, right? And so I think that's not to say that every garbage worker enjoys their job, but I think if they can appreciate that the job has dignity, it probably makes it something that they can enjoy.
Right. Last question before we open things up. You know, we haven't talked so much about the mechanisms that would lead to rising natural unemployment rate, and maybe eventually even a sort of growing expectation that a large number of prime age adults should not expect to work. And I wanted to send this to you first, Bruce. To what technologies right now do you think that are either existing or kind of right down the pike, like automated cars, do you think are the greatest threats to workers today? And maybe even is there a technology that we might not be able to see that you think could be extremely disruptive? I saved a really easy question.
This is the line about never make predictions, especially not about the future. I mean, certainly the self-driving cars have gotten tremendous attention, and for you know, reasons that are, I think, completely obvious to everyone. You know, I think sort of the as I say, I think, you know, a lot of the jobs that have been in the middle of the skill and in the middle of the earnings distribution are the jobs that have been automated so far. You know, the sort of the basic, you know, clerical work, and you know, just that's computerizable. But I think what you're going to see is the technologies moving out from the middle to both ends, and the self-driving cars are a great example, sort of at the lower end. And at the higher end, you know, computers reading, you know, radiological images, or computers translating things, and improvement. And there have been tremendous improvements in both. So, you know, I think there's a wide range of different things that, you know, you can automate that are automatable. And it's going to sort of hit, you know, sort of a little here and a little there, but or maybe a lot here and a lot there. But I think the thing that you want to be careful about, and we discussed this earlier, Derek, is that, and I know you kind of are on the same page, is that it's really easy to see the person who loses their job because of automation. It's much harder to spot the people who get new jobs because of automation. And, you know, I don't know if Adam Smith said this or not, but, you know, people have been saying how, you know, whatever the new technology is, how that's going to eliminate all jobs for centuries, and I don't know, it doesn't seem to have happened yet, right? So, and in some ways, you know, that's made it harder for people because people who've lost their jobs, but in other ways, it's improved the quality of jobs that many people have. So, you know, we just need to be careful about that sort of assumption that jobs are going to go away. Some jobs are going to go away, but other jobs are going to come back. Just exactly how that's going to play out, you know, that's a prediction about the future.
Great. Thank you very much for predicting the future for me, even though you promised many times you would not. I have something that I am, again, contractually obligated to read. Please pick up your feedback card. In parentheses, hold up the card. I've done so. And the pencil we provided to take 15 seconds now to fill out the top half of the front side. The top half of the front side. Your email address will only be used to send you a link to an online feedback site where you can share thoughts on tonight's forum. We really want your feedback, so please do sign up for that. We will not email you about anything else unless you check one of the boxes at the bottom of the card, or unless you win the raffle for the new iPad. It's here, and we're emailing to let you know.
In a Ziploc bag, right?
I'm sorry?
Does it come with a Ziploc bag?
Ziploc bag, now, officially it now comes with a Ziploc bag. Make sure that happens. If you could also jot down how you found out about this event, flyers, sidewalk signs, website through a friend, that would help us help you find out about similar events in the future. And as you're filling out those cards, we have reached the end of the panel, so thank you very much, and we can take some questions.
This is how my class usually is at the end, by the way.
I have questions that have been sent through the text service. How will the future of work, they're all coming in now, and it's my job to sift through them, figure out the best ones. Oh my God. How will the future of work disrupt patterns of education and research at the university level?
Let me take this one. This is,
I'm not going to take it.
I teach, the research I do is really about why have 6 studios dominated the industry, the entertainment industry for the last 100 years, and why are Amazon, Netflix, and Google having such an easy time coming in to that industry. And what we think is the answer is those studios were able to dominate 3 scarce resources about the market, and none of those things are as scarce as they used to be. Mm-hmm. And they're now these other 2 scarce resources that they don't have, right? And I always sort of end this by saying to the students, it's important to recognize that this sort of shift doesn't affect all industries. Like higher education, for example, we have nothing to worry about when it comes to technology changing scarcity in our business. And the students all sort of go, wait a second, your power looks exactly like the entertainment industry in the sense that you control the scarce resources of credentialing and the local distribution of content and the scarcity of the seats in the classroom, right? And you can imagine a world where none of those things are as scarce as they once were.
Interesting. I think of status as almost inherently scarce.
In what? So the credentialing or the status?
I guess I mean both together. So that, for example, if MIT said, MITx, if MIT announced MITx is just like an MIT degree, that wouldn't mean anything, because employers would still make a distinction between MIT, the 1,400 people that graduate undergrad every year from that institution, and MITx, the sort of online courses that they offer, where I don't know if you can get credentialed at MITx right now, but
I don't believe so now.
But I'm saying even if MIT just said
to protect their established business model, by the way.
But even if MIT said, all right, MITx is now the equivalent, I think a lot of employers would still see 2 different signals, sort of signal capital A from MIT and signal like lowercase a from MITx. And so status might be more scarce than the availability of a video or song online when it sort of suddenly is opened up to the internet and isn't just bounded to vinyl or the movie theater.
Potentially. I mean, I see the other, why is MIT and Carnegie Mellon is Carnegie Mellon and Ohio State is next, I'm sure, and then after that. But, in part it's because...
Where are we?
Or Northwestern, right?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Notre Dame.
Well, yeah, okay. I've really stepped in it now, haven't I? But in part, it's because there are just a scarce number of seats in the incoming class in MIT. They take the top ones, and then Carnegie Mellon takes the next ones, and then after that, what if there was no more scarcity in terms of the number of seats that you could educate at MIT? Would that blow up?
The interesting thing, I think it's. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say the joke that we just laughed at is like its own microcosm of the lesson, which is that it's really important for Northwestern to know its pecking order relative to Ohio State, and important for Notre Dame to know its pecking order relative to Northwestern. And so status is definitionally relative to other status in a way that content can never be. Content, if Stranger Things goes from a movie theater, which it would have been released in if it came out in 1981, to Netflix, where 45 million people can watch it immediately. That's just pure abundance. My experience, I feel so strongly about Stranger Things, my experience of Stranger Things is in no way changed by the fact that all three of you maybe have watched it.
Right.
But my degree from MIT-X is changed by the fact that the three of you also got that degree, because it can dilute the status. And the reason I think that it's important is because I think that even in a world where services are abundant and content is abundant and status is abundant, and it's just like pure, just an ocean of abundance, that status will still be finite. And we will still be in like a hominid struggle against each other to show like, no, I'm the best YouTube star, no, I'm the best. And the pure availability of the YouTube technology will not change the mammalian instinct to win status wars.
I think I'm not sure, maybe status is the right word, but I always think its reputation is very important in higher education. It's striking that, Harvard is the, quintessential university. It's also the first one started in the United States. So you talked about the 6 studios lasting for a century, but this is, this is several centuries. It's maintained its position. And I think it's because reputation is very important, because maybe I'm going to get a little too technical in the economics, but there's an inherent problem of what we call asymmetric information, which is you are students, and you want somebody to teach you. But by the fact that you want somebody to teach you means you actually don't know who's a good teacher, for example, right? And you could go to, I don't know, one of these online things, but they're not. So the way you solve problems of asymmetric information, the way the market solves them, is often through reputation. So you also don't know when you buy a TV that the TV is going to work. It could be empty. You don't understand even how the TV works. But the way it's solved is you buy a TV from an established company with a reputation. And I think that's something that's inherent in the nature of education, and that's why reputation matters so much.
And the only thing I'd say is I think we're developing new forms of reputation, right? I mean, I think you're right. If I was in a Best Buy, I would strongly rely on Sony as the signal of reputation. But when I'm shopping on Amazon, I rely on the star rating, right? And this completely unknown television that has a really good star rating from 1,000 people, you go, yeah, it's probably good.
But I think there's a little bit more than just this, which is, sorry, were you?
No, go ahead.
Which is that, I'm going to just go out on a limb and speculate that those of you who are students have learned as much from each other as you have learned from any of the faculty in your classes. And that's not solely because we're bumbling and inarticulate.
Not to exclude that possibility, though.
That's only part of the explanation. The other part of the explanation is that's kind of the way this one works, And, you want to go to a great school because you want to be around other people who are really, charged up about what they're doing and capable, because you'll kind of learn from them and you'll develop a network that will include them. So I think, there's that piece. I don't know where this one is, personally. I don't know where this one is going. I think the efforts that have been done. Everyone's like, oh, MOOCs are going to take over the planet, and Ohio State's just going to be like one supercomputer, and we're going to sell off the Oval, and whatever. It hasn't happened yet, okay? And I'm not saying that it's not going to happen, but it's not happening anytime soon. And the way it seems like the technology has frequently been most successful in this sphere is in terms of like a flipped model where you're doing the lectures at home and then you're doing sort of more interactive work in the classroom. But that again, that's taking advantage of the fact that people are learning from each other and their interactions.
The only thing I'd say is getting back to another thing that really resonated with me about your opening talk is this idea of how difficult it is for human beings to respond to these sorts of rapid technological changes. I think that's also true of institutions. And I think if you look at the history of, and this is Joseph Schumpeter, Clayton Christensen, if you look at the history of institutions and their ability to respond to significant technological disruptions, we're lousy at it. And so those, those
when
innovations.
When you say we, do you mean humans or educational
just the institution, right? Okay. We tend to try to preserve what we've always done, and ignore this new opportunities. Right. If there's going to be an innovation, I think we in higher education are going to be some of the last to embrace it. It's going to come from outside and we can argue all we want about whether online education is better or worse than in-class education. I would still argue it doesn't have to be better. It just has to be good enough for less than $40,000 a year and less than 4 years of your time.
I mean, there are examples when new technologies, when computers became big. Bill Gates, these guys actually learned it on their own, right? They bypassed the existing institutions, and there was enough of a need that they were able to do that. So.
We have a couple questions about universal basic income, UBI. And the one that was really interesting to me asked, Joe, you talked about meeting with people in India and the example of the garbage collector and how these jobs that might not seem fun and might not seem like they are sort of classic examples of sort of the height of human capacity are nonetheless dignified because they have an outcome, and that outcome helps the world, and that is the definition of dignity. And the question is, what might happen if a lot of people are receiving universal basic income and they no longer have to work? Is the possibility of dignity shut off for them because the world has learned to take care of itself?
Yeah, I'm actually very worried about this. Not so much the universal basic income, but as a father of 4, my kids might receive a universal basic income from me and live in my basement.
It's very personal.
With iPads in.
Yeah, with iPads, exactly. No, I say it somewhat in jest, but it's a serious issue actually among young generation of people, and especially in other countries like Italy. I mean, they just sort of, it's like in a suspended adolescence, and it's not clear that the government providing it rather than your parents providing it would change very much. But I don't think it would be a flourishing life, one that you would reflect on and say, this has been a good life, even if all your material needs are met. We talked about it earlier today. I have young kids. There's the movie WALL-E, which is an oldie, but it's a kids movie, right? And those people in the spaceship, it's a dystopia, but they have all their physical needs met, but they've become less human. They're less than they should be. So I don't know. I have a good answer, but it's something that completely worries me. You would need to still sort of develop something. It doesn't mean that it has to be, it could be what you do with your free time, that's something beneficial. I don't know if it's creating art or doing something or volunteering in a community, but it seems to be like living in your parents' basement is a very isolating thing. It's not just that you're not doing work, it's that you're not starting a family, you're not developing the social relationships that are sort of critical to a good life.
Well, this actually goes back to something you said in the World Without Work article, and I've forgotten the exact framing of it, but it was basically, people say they hate their job.
I was going to bring this up.
But then they're also miserable when they're not working, yeah. Right? That I think, again, in some ways it goes back to the design argument.
Right.
That I think we are designed to find joy in work and creation.
Right. This was Csikszentmihalyi, is that how you pronounce his last name, more or less? He, psychologist, the author of a famous book called Flow, among other things, who did a study, I believe, I should have read this part of the essay before I went on stage to talk about it. I believe it was a study in Chicago where he asked people to write down how, first of all, whether they wanted to work more or have more free time, and they would always say, I want to have more free time, I always want more leisure time. And then he would give them diaries where they would be able to journal their emotions at work and at home. And he found that people seemed to be much more anxious when they were not working, when they were, it's sort of the curse of the boundless Sunday afternoon, where you don't know what to do, and so you turn on Law and Order, and then you watch like 7 of those, and you're like, wow, I've really wasted a day watching Law and Order. I'm speaking from personal experience there. That got really personal. And he called it the paradox of work, that we want to not work even though we miswant. We want to not work, but we should understand how much happier, how much less anxious simply being at work makes us feel. I find this, I'm persuaded by the research, but I also find it to be in tension with so much that we know from positive psychology about the sort of work that should make us happy, work that allows us to develop mastery, work that gives us achievable challenges, that gives us a sense of autonomy and even a sense of transcendence. These are qualities that are not common in a lot of the most common jobs in the U.S. Being a cashier is unbelievably redundant. Being a retail salesperson can be incredibly grueling. But being a cashier, for example, you think, if there were a video game whose play meant take the pixel, scan the pixel, bag the pixel, take the pixel, scan the pixel, bag the pixel, we'd say this is a terrible video game, and anybody that spends 7 hours a day playing it is wasting their life. But being a cashier is the most common job in America, so people are doing this. It's just not with pixels, it's with bread loaves. And so it goes to your original point, which is maybe the dignity inherently comes from the fact that this is a real world outcome, and that the bread would not be able to be put into the bag and would not be able to feed the family if not for the cashier. But does the individual cashier know that when he or she comes home after years of just scanning and bagging? Does he or she go to her husband and say, I'm so happy that I bagged 17 family's potential sandwiches today. It was a great day. Maybe, but maybe she's very miserable in the job. And so it does raise the question of, would these people be happier if they could be cultural producers? If they got $10,000 from the government, whatever, $15,000 from the government in the future, and they could make music, and they could play board games with their friends, and they could have book clubs online and in real life? Would that be a more fruitful life? And even one that allowed them to spend more time with their community and family. There's that classic quote that so few people, on the one hand, we value work, it's an enormous part of our life, and then there's that classic idea, no one on their deathbed says, I wish I worked more. And that this life might allow them to work with their family. So I love this question, and I am personally extremely torn. I don't know the answer. I'm probably as ambivalent about universal basic income as I am about anything I've thought so long about. I was looking to the audience for next question, not realizing that they were in
a couple
my
questions.
pocket. Okay, we'll go right here. Sure.
So this came up sort of in passing a couple of times about the sort of the working class is sort of least well positioned to transition into jobs that are being created but that they're not prepared for. And that to me is sort of the most vexing social question about it, right? And I wonder if you have thoughts about sort of how we, how do you address that from a policy perspective?
I think, so I think.
I'll just repeat. The question is, the question was that it's the working class, it's lower middle and lower income people that are going to be sort of first in line for the sort of tsunami of automation and job replacing technologies. And so what sort of public policies could we begin to think about that would help them?
Perfect. I think it's a great question. Clearly the number one thing that we want to do is to invest in education and skills. Now that's very easy to say for people who are now young and in school and say stay in school, whatever it is, learn a trade, learn abstract reasoning skills, but that there's no question the value of a college education has increased phenomenally over the course of the last 40 years in the United States. It's the best investment that you could possibly make. If if I had gotten the same rate of return on my retirement, I'd now be, Warren Buffett. It's just, it's an incredibly good investment for people who are able to do well and do it. I think there is a much more problematic question, which is, what about people who are, 40 or 50 years old who, may go back and take a little retraining and may take a course or may learn some new sets of skills, but they're not going to go back and restart this process. I think that's a really, when I do this work, and part of what got me into this is thinking about what the implications are for people and the families and the consequences, and that's a real tough one, because we say, economists say this, we call it Pareto optimality, but otherwise, and those who don't want to get into economic jargon say, the winners are going to gain more than the losers are going to lose. That's true, but if you're one of the losers, that's not very great consolation that someone else out there gained more than you lost, right? And I don't know that we have a great answer to that question. I mean, one is retraining, making opportunities available. The universal basic incomes come up. I personally am a little bit more of a fan of the earned income tax credit. We can get into our wonky, discussion of, redistribution policies. But I think that the key of the EITC is that it provides people with incentives to work and rewards people for working and sort of tops them off in a way that gets them more money for the work that they do. But that's a hugely important and troubling question.
The one thing that I would add to that is one of the issues that I am thinking the most about right now is the tension between redistribution, which strikes me as a political and moral necessity in a world with increasing income inequality and potential automation, and multiculturalism. The societies that have been most successful at having long-term redistribution programs have almost always been homogenous. Mm-hmm. You look at Central Europe, Northern Europe, you can even look at communities like Minneapolis, St. Paul in the 1960s and 70s, and Portland, Oregon. And unfortunately, there's pretty clear both theoretical and sort of real-world evidence that suggests that as communities become more multicultural, they become less inclined to redistribute, because we are just, as a species, more empathetic towards people that look like us. That sucks, because I don't want to shunt off American multiculturalism. I think it's a big part of what makes America America. And it also, in a very sort of straightforward way, I think it's really important to have a growing labor force, and countries that don't have immigration don't have growing labor forces, and that's bad for all sorts of reasons. But I think this is going to be a really important tension in the future that's basically going to be, I would predict it's going to be the central tension of every presidential campaign for the next maybe 40 years. There's a question in the back.
Yeah, this is just kind of similar. I'm kind of wondering what your predictions are. A lot of this current administration's policies are trying almost, in a sense, to go back to the nostalgic, steel workers. And I know a lot of people, a lot of economists are skeptical of this. How do you all foresee that panning out?
I guess the first thing is when you see the decline of manufacturing, when you see the rising inequality, I think the first thing that the press, maybe the public, certainly politicians always latch on to: trade and immigration. Yeah. Those are sort of easy things to latch onto, but in fact, those are, most of the research shows that those are very small. Actually, immigration is even debatable. My read of the immigration literature, Bruce, you could comment if you want, is that it's true that immigration does hurt low-skilled workers, but it's not the big thing that's driving the plight of low-skilled workers. It's the same with trade. it's technological change. And I don't think you put technologies in, back into the bag after they're taken out. So I just don't, I think that it's an impossible thing, and I just don't see it ever happening.
I also think, the other thing that, that I would say to that, I agree absolutely with everything that Joe just said, but the other thing that I would say, and this maybe gets a little bit more to the moral or ethical aspects of what we're talking about tonight, I get this, so I'm just going to give you a little thought experiment, but somewhere they drew a line and they called one part of it the United States and the other part of it Mexico and a third part of it Canada. And the line has moved back and forth. And it's a little odd. I get it at some level. I'm not a complete dunce, but it's a little odd that the people who were, 5 inches south of that border sort of, that's too bad. I'm 5 inches north of the border. And I get why, for budgetary reasons and cultural reasons and so forth, that's an oversimplification. But it's a little odd if you step back, because they're people too, and they have lives, and maybe we should have some concern for their lives as well.
I want to second, third, and fourth that point. I think there's a lot of analysis of NAFTA, for example, that'll show NAFTA created so many jobs in Mexico, seems to have slightly increased the total production of the United States, but the distribution of that production changed so as to cost certain cities manufacturing jobs and other jobs that were lost to the Americas. And so the net result of this trade policy has been clearly beneficial to humanity, but the distribution of that benefit has been unequal within the United States, and therefore it's bad. That's a weird way to look at a policy, I think. I understand why it's a politically useful way to look at it, but I think it's a morally weird way to look at it. And I've said, I'm so glad you said that. I've written down, there's not a moral code I'm aware of that says that a baby born 5 minutes north of El Paso is worth 100x the baby born 5 minutes south of El Paso. And I understand that an absolute open immigration policy, which is sort of the argument ad absurdum of this idea that the lines are arbitrary. I think that open immigration policies are probably politically impossible, but at the same time, I do think that when you think about how every decade there's an issue that 20, 30 years earlier sounded insane. Gay marriage was insane 20 and 30 years ago. When Andrew Sullivan wrote that essay in TNR, even as a conservative gay man, he was considered an absolute crazy radical. And now I think a lot of people think of it as the most blasé thing in the world. Yeah, of course. And you have to, every decade is going to have something like this. And in thinking, what's going to be that, oh yeah, of course, how is this even a thing in 20, 30 years from now? I do think there's a possibility that people are going to say, wait, if it was racist to say that that blacks and whites from Alabama were worth differently, but not somehow ist to say that babies separated by 0.5 miles across the Mexican border are worth 100x differently from each other. I feel like that's the sort of moral argument that might be ironically mainstreamed by the extremism of the current president. We have time for one more question, and I have a candidate on my phone, but I also can go to the audience in case there is a hand. No? The question is, oh, yes, please.
So my question is, in what ways did technology make the labor market more or less free, and how might it redefine the relationship between employer and employee?
More or less free? Free as in open?
Free as in,
Do you mean like human freedom? not like free, not like fluid, not like a fluidly.
Interpret free however you.
Oh, interesting.
Feel free. All right.
So a Rorschach question, yeah. I'll start. One thing that I was thinking about, Joe, when you were talking about dignity and sort of order, is there's this great, well, I think that sometimes the boundaries of work can sometimes create meaning in a way that we might not necessarily choose. That the anxiety that comes from an empty Sunday afternoon, we might imagine that we want our lives to be completely like this blank slate that we can just totally make ours. But in fact, there seems to be a certain amount of happiness and satisfaction that comes from working within painted lines. One of my favorite like quotes in general is Robert Frost, writing poetry without rhyme is like playing tennis without a net. And then in many ways, like work is the net. Like the jobs that exist, the specific job categories that exist are the net sometimes that make them meaningful. And I, for example, did not if I had my druthers, I would have like tried to be a novelist maybe at like 22. I didn't really know a lot about economics. I wasn't interested in it, but I had to learn about it because that was the job that I got at the Atlantic. And having to learn about it made me really like it, and working really, really hard at it, and sort of beginning to feel myself becoming more facile with certain terminology like Paretos, whatever it is, made me feel better about it. And so in a weird way, that like the net, the boundaries, the lack of freedom, enhanced enjoyment in a somewhat ironic way. And one thing that I think is an open question is whether people can find equal value in work when the boundaries go away, when it turns out that a lot of their lives can be taken care for them, whether they can find meaning in work without boundaries.
Dude, learning economics is a slippery slope. But, I'd say so of the people here, I'm the one who lives here, but I woke up this morning in Washington, D.C. for a 8 a.m. meeting, and the Uber driver who took me to Dulles Airport to come back here, been doing it for 2 years, about 3,000 passengers, full-time job. He loved it. I mean, we had a conversation about it, and he loved it. He's like, if I'm tired, I leave. If I want to go see a movie, I go see a movie. If I want to work long, I work long. What's the big deal? Like, they let me do it. And so, in that way, part of the economy is freed up by technology. I mean, that's one particular place where you can see it most visibly. But I think also technology is allowing people to collaborate and combine pieces, sometimes for better. I mean, sometimes this is a way of saying, let's take a job that might have been a job and had benefits and been in-house and call that job a contractor that, is free and doesn't have benefits and doesn't have a lot of those advantages. But in other cases, that can be an improvement because maybe you want more work-life balance or want the ability to flex time. So I mean, I think, my intuition, and this is intuition rather than based on research, is that there is more flexibility, there is more freedom from technologies, but that has both, sometimes you need to be, I mean, I guess it's another way, a different spin on what you're saying, Derek, is, but sometimes you need to be careful what you wish for.